take her.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, if you're on the Asia-Pacific side of the world. My name is Tim. I work for the Anticipation Hub, and I'm very pleased to see so many people here for today's community conversation. We're going to be talking about active frameworks today. When is a framework active, or an anticipatory action framework? When is it not active? What happens to these frameworks? How do they expire, and what can we do about it? So as it's a community conversation, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and the team, the speakers that we have here today, will either answer them at the end or drop into the chat later on. And we have Celine and Bin from Climate Care, Climate Justice, and we have Damien from FAO, and I'll hand straight over to them. Damien, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think, Bin, you're going to share the presentation. We will be... Oh, did I misunderstood?
Well, we can do it together.
Indeed, but I mean, we need to share the slides. I'm Damien. I'm working with FAO Regional Office in Asia and the Pacific. I will be presenting the initial results of the regional anticipatory action mapping exercise for 2025. But this is the third consecutive year we are doing an extensive mapping of anticipatory action in Asia and the Pacific. And we have quite a number of interesting results on the actionability or readiness of the anticipatory action frameworks, which are being developed mostly by humanitarian actors in Asia and the Pacific. And I think this is a question we've been asking ourselves quite often. What is happening with anticipatory action frameworks once they are developed? Are they remaining active forever? Are they getting dormant at some point? Are they dying because of different reasons? And that's something we wanted to understand better. So I'll be able to share a few information today. And over to Bin from CARE.
Thanks a lot, Damien. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Bing, and I am the Climate Justice Program Quality Lead at CARE Climate Justice Center, so basically CARE. And thanks a lot to Tim and to Damien for involving us in these very interesting conversations on the situations of our AA frameworks after the development, we would say. Thanks a lot also for all the team that participating in these studies, and especially for those who participating in the interviews and the surveys. I hope many of you here today. So yes, our study is also looking more or less the same questions with the one that led by our Asia Pacific group, but we're looking more or less as global level to see, what is the situation, and also looking on also a little bit at qualitative time, focusing on, like status of AA frameworks post development, what happened to them, as say by Damien, but also looking into, what are the key challenges and come up with some recommendation. So looking forward to very much discussing with you in this interesting topic. Let me start it with some pre-conservation questions. Please, if you can scan this QR code on Mentimeters and answer the questions on Mentimeters. It's a very basic questions about thinking about active or inactive readiness or not ready, dormant or sleeping, just say by Damien. So I don't know whether some colleagues can also share the link in the chat. I cannot see the chat, so if someone can check if everything is okay.
Yes, the link is shared in the chat.
Okay, great.
Bin, if you can, if you can leave the presentation, I can show the results in real time.
Yes, that would be great.
Those are the results for the first question. Do you want to read the first question, Bin?
Yes, the first question is in your experience, is it likely that an AA framework remain active 3 years after the completion? So we see within the 3 years, normally we could expecting a minimum disaster return period is 3 to 5 years, right? So it should be active within the 3 years. So we see what is our result, Damien?
So far we have 17 response, and you can see that half of them are thinking it's likely, it's still active. Majority believe that it really depends on the context, which country, which are the ongoing projects, etc. And a few have never thought about it and are asking the question, does it really matter if the framework is active or inactive? So we might wait a few more answers, already 22 answers, but it's quite consistent, and I believe we have a good reflection from the participants that, yeah, framework readiness might depend a lot from the context. It's not given that they will remain active. So there is already some kind of indication being that the context matters. And yeah, we are reaching nearly 30 answers. So perhaps we can move to the next question. I don't see much change. Next question.
Yes, next question. What is the percentage of AA frameworks activating per year? So we're looking into,
average.
Yeah, in average. What do you think, whether we go activating from 20 to 30%, 30 to 50%, or we think that more than 50%?
And we might assume that the donors would expect that we are activating a lot, that there might be more than 50% of frameworks activating. But if we really look at the results and we start to have some estimations, realistically and logically, there are not extreme events every month. There is a certain figure that might be consistent over the regions. And with nearly half of the response already recorded, we see a majority believing it's between 20 and 30% of the frameworks that might activate on a yearly basis. Less response are considering that it could be a bit higher, and nobody expects that 1 out of 2 frameworks will be activating on a given year, which is very correct. And I think in our conversation today, we will have some data showing that it's indeed between 20 and 30%. As we have now reached half of the responses, I will move to the last slide. Last question. So the question is, what is the main reason, in your opinion, for a framework to be inactive, not ready for activation? You can say whatever you think is the main reason. I see no funding, which I guess is no fuel funding. Certainly critical issue for activating existing and completed frameworks. Loss of knowledge, triggers are not met. Yeah, indeed, if a trigger is not met in the year, that there will be no activation. Forecasting is not mature. That's a very interesting point. No disaster, no trigger. Yes, very similar. Absence of extreme hazards, I guess. Okay, government ownership is an interesting one. I guess it's the opposite, right? If the government is not supporting the process, it might prevent and hinder the sustainability of AA frameworks, perhaps. Triggers not met is growing, yes. sorry, I'm trying to catch some new ideas. Staff turnover, very good point. Project-based, yes, indeed. People leave, weak or lack of governance. Super interesting answers. And again, this was just a small warming up, small introduction to raise interest with what we are going to present. We, I think, have some data, some findings that we can share today to explain why given framework that has been developed in a country for a certain hazard might become inactive after some time. And we hope to also share some suggestion, ideas on how to perhaps keep those frameworks active. Again, it's quite an investment when we are developing a framework. And the intention is certainly to be able to maintain a minimum level of readiness in the different countries. Thanks a lot for your participation in this short Mentimeter, which was really aiming at introducing the topic of the day, what happens with anticipatory action frameworks once they are developed. And we will be sharing some findings from Asia and the Pacific first, and then from the global study that has been completed by CARE. If perhaps we can get back to the slides, I will introduce in 10, maximum 15 minutes, the main results from the anticipatory action mapping exercise for Asia and the Pacific. Which now has been implemented 3 years in a row. So we are starting to have some good information and some good data to present. So just for your information, the mapping exercise, which is happening since 2023, has been covering at the beginning 13 countries, then 15 countries in 2024. And now we are covering 17 countries. You can see in red color the latest countries who are starting to implement anticipatory action in Asia and the Pacific, namely India, Malaysia, and Palau. And there are quite a number of Pacific countries who are starting to work also on the concept. So we expect next year to, in 2026, to run the anticipatory action mapping survey with nearly 25 countries. So we will have more and more information. Next slide. Just for your information, in 2023, when we started the mapping, we identified 101 anticipatory action frameworks in 13 countries. In 2024, we reached 15 countries with the mapping exercise, and we identified 137 anticipatory action frameworks, which are either under development or completed. In 2025, it's still growing. 3 more countries, so now 17 countries are covered. 1 country, Papua New Guinea, was not reached this year, so it's only 17 countries. We identified 169 anticipatory action frameworks, and you can see on the graph the 3 main hazards covered by anticipatory action in Asia and the Pacific are drought, typhoon, flood. Flood is overall the main hazard covered by anticipatory action. What's interesting in the graph is to see that there was a peak in 2024 with the number of drought anticipatory action frameworks. That was due to El Nino episode in 2023-2024. We expect that there will be another peak this year because there is a El Nino being very likely towards the end of 2026. So this anticipatory action framework for drought might become another priority in 2026. On the right end of the slide, you can see that we have a category called other hazards covered by anticipatory action that consists of mostly heat wave. It's growing. We have 11 anticipatory action frameworks for heat wave identified in 2025, but it's also covering cold wave, landslide, epidemics, and a few other more anecdotal hazards covered by anticipatory action. Overall, it's growing. Is it a good news? Yes, it's interesting to see that the concept is growing, is raising interest. Now that comes with also some constraints. How do we keep all these anticipatory action frameworks active? And you will see in the presentation that a lot of these anticipatory action frameworks do not remain active once they are completed. If we go to the next slide, this is an interesting result that we will try to highlight in the mapping exercise 2025, which is nearly completed. Our consultant is writing the report, and we will have the document ready in May 2026. What we have noted is that, yes, there is an overall increase in terms of anticipatory action frameworks, being for flood, drought, cyclone is remaining quite stable over the years. For heat wave, it's growing. But what we've seen also is that some frameworks that were reported in 2023 were not reported anymore in 2024. And some of the frameworks overall that were reported in 2023 and 2024 are also not reported anymore in 2025. We have followed up with those respondents who did not report on the activity in 2025. You can see that it's 1 out of 5 frameworks which are not reported from last year to the next year. The reasons, mostly, if you click one more time, Bin, the reasons are mostly due to the fact that we changed slightly the methodology of the mapping last year, to align with the methodology of the global overview report of the Anticipation Hub. So we are only identifying frameworks which are either led by one agency or multi-agencies frameworks, such as the consortium frameworks or the SURF OCHA framework. So we count only one framework if they are using the same trigger methodology, the same source of funding, and have a coordinated approach. Due to that methodology, there are a few frameworks that were not counted anymore in 2025. Nonetheless, the main reason is that a lot of these frameworks were developed as part of a project. The project ended, and the agency is now trying to secure some new funding to be able to revive the anticipatory action activities they implemented in the past. And that's the most common reason. So from a number of agencies who responded in 2023 or 2024, there is no more activity reported in 2025. And we need to understand if that is going to prevent activations in certain countries when an extreme event is being predicted. What we have noted also in our mapping 2025 in the next slide, and we tried to really narrow down that information. When we ask about active framework, we assume that one completed framework is active, but that's not always the case. So we added one category in our survey in 2025, where we asked how many frameworks are inactive, not ready for activations. The question didn't work very well. We have understood that in some cases, one agency would prefer to not mention that their framework was inactive, so they reported it was active. There is maybe a need to define a little bit better what is the meaning of inactive framework. Nonetheless, we got 27 frameworks completed that were reported to be inactive in 2025. And a number of FAO frameworks in 2025 were inactive for the good reason that they were focusing on drought. And 2025 was a very La Nina wet year, so we were not very concerned about drought, and we didn't even monitor the hazard. So our drought frameworks as FAO were completely inactive in 2025, but we are going to reactivate them in 2026 due to the upcoming El Nino at the end of the year. So the question, even though it was not very well understood, is interesting, as it is showing that nearly 1 out of 5 frameworks is also inactive on a given year. And that is maybe reasonable, but we need to understand what is preventing them to be inactive. Is it just temporary and active decision of the organization to put this particular framework on hold with the capacity to revive it later? Or is it an unforeseen deactivation of the framework due to the difficulty to have a proper trigger, difficulty to access fuel financing? And if we cannot really define why frameworks are becoming inactive, we might have difficulties to find a solution to keep them at least a minimum level of readiness. I will just note quickly that a number of frameworks a number of anticipatory action are developed and activated without a framework. We call them ad hoc AA intervention. They very much refer to the start fund activation window, where agencies decide as a peer review process to activate or not. And we will present those ad hoc activation in the report on a separate chapter. If we go to the next slide, that's my last slide. Just wanted to stress that there were 30 AA protocol or AA framework activation in 2024, very much the same number in 2025, 31, with a growing number of framework. We have a very stable number of activation. That could be due to the fact that maybe there is just enough funding for 30, 31 activations in the region, might be due to the fact that the number of extreme events remain stable. I must say that in Asia and the Pacific, there were extreme disasters in Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand in 2025. And aside from one activation in Indonesia and, Thailand is not covered by AA, and Vietnam, we had one activation, but government was not very supportive of anticipatory action last year due to some administrative restructuring with one administrative level that was removed in 2025. So that means there were some events which we didn't address with activations, but you can see that it's more or less always the same countries where activation happen, and we are trying to understand why certain countries like Sri Lanka, Fiji, Myanmar never activated in the past 3 years. So this question of readiness, being capable of activating, is really important if we can understand better what are the main barriers, what are the main elements that can prevent all these frameworks being set to activate when the extreme event is being anticipated. It is crucial we keep a certain level of readiness, and I believe that CARE and BIN had similar findings in their study and will complement what I just presented for Asia and the Pacific. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Damien. I think if you can hear me, I think we have already very, very interesting quantitative data looking into the other side of the coin, not only those that is activated, but those are not activated. And if we're looking into the percentage just presented by Damien, we have a 48 out of 169. So almost 1/3 that's starting to disappear from the system, plus 27 that is not active. Just so we're coming to an estimation of from 30 to 50% of our frameworks in Asia Pacific only that having questions about whether they are still there, whether they still be able to ready to trigger. And if we look into investment, I mean, the investment to set up an early AA frameworks vary significantly, but it can go from 500 to 100 million or even 2 million. So if you adding up the numbers of AA framework that has been set up and never been triggered, I think that quite a lot of money has been there. So it is also the questions of cost benefits when we develop a lot or investing a lot of build and then will not be able to maintain it. So it is exactly the questions for care when we conduct these studies. Are we ready? Or the questions of maintenance of the system. So if we look a little bit on the framework globe, we're having much smaller sample because we're doing a survey. But we see interesting trends. So if you can see that on the regions that we cover, the percentage of never activated in Asia Pacific is quite high. So almost double those that actually activated. Africa is a little bit less. So also interesting because Asia Pacific is the region that extremely exposed to disaster, and say by Damien, we would expecting more activation, but the ratio is actually low compared to other regions. When we look into different types of hazards, also another interesting findings is that floods having high ratios of never activated. It is honestly to me a surprise because floods anticipatory actions are among the most developed system. It is easier for us to forecast, it's easier for us to set up the triggers compared to storm or hurricane or cyclone who can changing the trajectories. Flood is more stable. But then the floods is the one that having more frameworks that never activated. So it's also a question for us to see why it is the case. So that is the first findings that we find during our survey. Then I think here I'm not sure whether we set up the Mentimeters. Maybe we just put this here for the discussions. So coming to the questions of inactive, and just say by Damien, the country offices will say, okay, what do you mean by inactive? Do you mean that we are still there, but there is no disaster, so we just waiting. So we still functioning, the triggers are there, the capacity are there, the money are there, but there is no disaster. So what we fully functional, but we are in sleeping mode. Then the second, related to the maybe partially operational. So we have these 3 bricks of trigger actions, fuel. Some of that is not working. The trigger is not working. I see that most of you said in the first Mentimeters, or we don't have money. So this, as all these 3 components are interconnected, one component is not available, the entire system will not be able to function. Another possibility is suspended due to external factors, whether the case like Vietnam that Damien mentioned recently, or in Ethiopia when the government decided not to acknowledge or to recognize the triggers that we set up. And then there are cases that it just disappeared, just that, nothing left. People gone, staff turnover, project ended, and it's gone. So there is also some cases that happened. So that's the reason why we try to breaking down, and because it having different moments of inactive, having different implications. Because the more we know why it's not inactive, the more we can make it active. I think we may keep this discussion a little bit later in the day, Damien, or you could like to maybe to check with participants a little bit here.
So, sorry again, Bill.
Yeah, I'm just asking whether shall we just check with participants that how they fight about the main causes on of these 4 of the inactive, because I did not set the Mentimeters.
Yes. I mean, there are so many ongoing chats, super interesting. That's why I was reading through the points. I believe some people might react in the chat box on what is the most common. And there was a very, very interesting point on the fact that a framework should probably not be connected to projects, because that prevents a lot the sustainability of this approach. It should not, I mean, I guess developing a framework can be project-based, but keeping it alive means we need to integrate our framework into the practice of the organization. And there should be maybe, and we will discuss that later, there should be also a system which makes sure there is access to proper trigger, perhaps from the government, to replace all this very, very heavy investment we are doing in certain countries where we develop almost a parallel system to the National Met Office or National Disaster Management Agency. So, I mean, if anyone would like to pick one of those 4 categories and share some thoughts in the chat box, I guess that's a good way to advance. Obviously, we want to keep some time at the end of this presentation to exchange and learn from the participants.
Thanks, Damien. Agree with you. So if you can keep in mind, because this is the first question that we have every time we do the interview, people keep asking, what do you mean? What do you mean by active, or what do you mean by inactive? And actually, if you're breaking down the inactive, it can have a different implications. Then I just continue with the next slide. That is the problem. We see that there is the numbers of frameworks that is not active. Then the question is why? And when we go through this why, we see that there is a lot related to thresholds not met, and there is a question of triggers. As much as we can see in other in our Mentimeters, the triggers has always been a bottleneck. The funding coming next, and then everything related to operational capacities, government is also an issue. And I will breaking down these in the next slide. Firstly, related to triggers. Triggers is difficult to set up, and then it's also very difficult to maintain. So basically, the first thing related to technical challenges. So designing triggers that accurately reflect hazards is remaining very complex, and I think most of you already mentioned it, whether we need to update the triggers, whether we have the data. So, I mean, and then there is on the questions of how we design the triggers, whether we prioritize localized data, or global data, trying to merging them, on that can also having tricky. Access to localized data is the problem, because what if at one moment the localized data stop providing us, or the reliance on global data sets is also having the questions of localizations of the triggers. So this is one of the issues related to the technical design of the trigger itself. Then it comes to the governance. Yes, we have a good data. Yes, we have a good trigger, but the government doesn't recognize it, or the government doesn't supporting it. So the case of Ethiopia, when we trigger, but the government say, no, it is not aligned with what we think. This is not aligned with our policy. Then we basically cannot trigger. Then related to the operational constraints, because most of our triggers depend, but there's a lot of triggers. For example, drought is actually a multi-stakeholder trigger systems. So for drought, we may need precipitation, we may need food net, we may need market price, and we try to put all of them together. For cyclones, we may need wind speed, we need precipitation, and then we need also some vulnerability data. The data sharing mechanism, the more robust and complex triggers, then the more difficult for us to maintain after that. So there is this operational constraints, and of course, everything related to financial and capacities requirements. So we're talking about, actually it costs. It costs to collect data. It costs to pay someone to enter the data. It costs to make sure that the person know what to enter. So capacity, financial, and sometimes the local national capacity cannot maintain such data entering due to technical and financial constraints beyond the project timeframe. So the first question is the triggers. Now, operational constraint, concept, coordination, and capacities. And I'm so happy to see that you having questions on the chat related to, oh, but what do you mean by readiness? And this is the questions that everyone talking about it when we do the interview. What do you mean the readiness? Readiness before, readiness better, after? So there is no shared definitions on readiness. We have a fuel, we have a build, we have a fuel, and no one pay attention to the period in the middle. Or we do, but then we do it in our way. So there is no consistencies in how we identify the maintenance, the readiness phase, what will be our priorities, whether we focus on monitoring, whether we focus on simulation, whether we focus on stock pre-positioning, and on this kind of discrepancies in understanding and operationalize readiness, make it also inconsistently in prioritize and funded. So this is also one of the big gaps that we identify in understanding and operationalize the concept of readiness. Then in terms of coordination, again, we have AA structures, we have a MedService, we have a DRN, we have a civil society organization. We're putting them all together under our beautiful AA technical working groups. Set up by the build phases, but in some cases, it's very difficult to maintain beyond the projects. How to make sure that they're still meeting, how to make sure that they still coordinate, how to make sure that they will update the beneficiaries, how to make sure that someone checking on the pre-positioning of stocks. The more stakeholders you involve, the more difficult to maintain. Then fragmentation across the framework. So we have 150 AA in 48 countries. This is the data from last year. So we have a triple countries. In Asia Pacific, when Damien was saying we have 169 this year, so we're talking about this year data, 169 in 17 countries. So basically, if you put on an average, 10 AA framework per country, 10. So very simple, the more AA framework, the more complex, the more costly for you to maintain. Some countries, I think they have 17, 20, 25 frameworks at the same time. Just thinking about instead of managing 2, 3, 4, you're managing 20. That costly, that time consuming, and that also definitely putting weight on the maintenance. And then everything related to capacity gaps and sustaining anticipatory action on top of the numbers of frameworks that are blooming everywhere. So that is the operational constraints. And last, of course, but not least, the financial constraints. So we recognize that there is a funding build dominate. So we have a lot of money focused on build. And then fuel money, yes, we have reserve, we have start, we have draft, but it still remains ad hoc, delay, or insufficiently secured. And what is the implications for the maintenance? So if you can see the time that mostly the activation has been made, you see that most of the activation is within the first year after the activation, after the finalization, and also even during the AAF development. So 16 are actually tied to the during or just after the project is ended. And then for those who surviving after the first year, there's less. So this is showing a fact that most of the activation still tying to the projects in the build phase, who or which we have a pre-positioning funding for triggering. But after the project is over, the fuel funding is an issue. And this is also affecting the maintenance, how you can make sure that it is triggered if you don't have money behind to trigger it. There is everything related to continuity and sustainability. Well, we keep trying as much as possible to institutionalize our DRM within the DRM systems. But well, we have a beautiful cases like in Bangladesh, in the Philippines, but it is quite exceptional cases. And in many countries, institutionalized efforts do not guarantee especially funding. We can have the national framework, but when it is triggered, funding have to come from outside. So we cannot guarantee on the component of the anticipatory actions to make sure that it can be ready to trigger anytime. And then, of course, everything related to financing, when we say we're just doing on fuel and build, and there is not a lot of attention to the maintenance, except what we see with the draft model when we have the full cycles of build, readiness, maintenance. But this is quite a special and exception, and really a very good lesson learned. So that is on the three challenges that we found during our studies. And we would like maybe to stop here to ask you on this Mentimeter about, okay, on the challenges. I think it's not a surprise to you. I hope that it is a surprise in terms of how big it is to our daily work. But then the challenges is to overcome. So what we should do to overcome these challenges, what is needed to keep our AA framework active. So if you can scan the QR code, and also to, if Celine, if you can copy the Menti in the chat, please. Is it good, Celine, that the Menti is copying the chat so that I can maybe start looking at the result?
Sorry, Bin, I'm having a little bit of technical problem to access the Menti.
Okay.
Just trying to.
Are we good with the QR code? Okay. I think Tim make it. Thanks a lot, Tim. And then
thank you, Tim. Perfect.
I may try to stop sharing the screen and get to the result of the Mentimeters to see what do you think we can do. Okay, I can try to share quickly the result. Okay. Oops. It's first time I use Mentimeter actually. Hope it makes some sense. We have only 11 people. So I mean, if we can, you know, see a little bit. So we have a big part related to funding, maintenance funding. But I think we talked a lot about also flexible funding. We talk about guarantee financing. We talk about pool fund. So money matters. But in addition to that, I see that there is a big question related to ownership. I think that's definitely interesting. We look into ownership. We look into government engagement. We look into ownership of the government. We look into cooperation between agencies, relationship with partners, capacity building, national buy-in, harmonize the system, government policy. So the government institutionalization play a bigger part here. Ownership is important. But then we can see that there is a lot talking about how to address the triggers when we talk into data access. We look into automizations. We look into update the data. We look into localized triggers. We look into AI uses. Good point. Maybe as a good way for us to reduce a little bit the urban or the burdens on the following up what is happening. So really, really interesting to see on these findings or recommendations because it is very much in line with our recommendations in the studies. And I would then maybe stop sharing the Mentimeters. Since we have almost half of the participants answer the questions, and we end with funding, with funding, with ownership, with institutionalization. Exactly so, as part of our recommendations. So this is what we think would be useful to consider to keep our framework active and keeping in mind. Firstly, flexible context-adapted trigger system. Trigger remaining on one of the challenges. Yes, we always would like to have a very good trigger, robust trigger, but the more robust, the more complex, the more difficult for the maintenance. Either we go for perfect solutions that will not be maintained, or we go for near perfect, but will be staying over time. So really moving to simplify locally managed models that integrated global community-based data source, but it is important that it have to be embedded into institutional practice. Don't creating additional practice, because the more we're creating additional practice in the institutional, the more challenging for us to sustain. So this is what we're really calling for in terms of triggers. The second recommendation is harmonization and DRM integration. So talking about more than 169 frameworks existing in Asia Pacific, and if you're adding in Africa, Latin America, and then an average of 10 frameworks per country, then it is a lot. So reducing fragmentation, aligning our approaches, aligning our triggers so that it would be less burden on the maintenance, and everything related to embedded anticipatory action within the national disaster management structures that you all say about institutionalization. And another practice, I think it also interesting, especially for those working in INGOs like us, is that we ourselves walk our talk. That we also need to have anticipatory action embedded in our own systems that we monitor, we maintain, which is not producing projects built and then fuel. But then most of the organizations, I think like SAFE, like CARE, we're having our emergency preparedness package, how we can integrate anticipatory action within the organizational system as well, so that we are ready there to support our partners, not completely depending on external funding. So within CARE, for example, we are setting up the Early Action Fund that can support the maintenance of the AA structure. So we also try to integrating it or institutionalize it ourselves to make sure that we can share this burden. Then the questions of readiness. What do we mean by readiness? Whether it is sleeping, fully functional, halfly functional, or died. Sorry to just not want to use that word, but dismantle, let's say. We need to standardize and systemize readiness, establish clear definition for readiness, setting up maybe minimum standard for readiness. So you can tick the box. If my AA frameworks are monitor, operationalize, finance, for example, then I can say my framework is ready. And then when we have this kind of minimum standards, we also to make sure that the maintenance activity are explicitly planned, financed, and assigned to local actors as the recurring program components. Otherwise, it would be lost in the middle of build and fuel. And last but not least is transforming finance mechanism. Most of you already talked about it in our Mentimeters. You're talking about pool fund, you're talking about index-based insurance, organizational fund. So it is important that we need to look at anticipatory action as a continuum, cyclic process. Bio-maintenance fuel, bio-maintenance fuel, bio-maintenance fuel, maintenance fuel. It's just not a one linear parallel system of bio and fuel. So this is something we really recommend also for donors and for organizations to look at. So that is the 4 recommendations, and we really, together with Damien, we think we are still at the very early stage to understand, and on this recommendation need to be further breaking down to what it means specifically. And on that note, I pass to Damien to giving a specific example from Asia Pacific. Over to you, Damien.
Thanks. I will not take too much time. Maybe we can skip the definition of AA active framework because you already talked a lot about it. Just wanted to stress one element that we tried to understand better 2 years ago. Yeah, the next slide, please, Bin, was how do we engage government? I mean, I saw in the chat box a lot of people mentioning that the AA systems very much have been developed in parallel with national disaster management mechanism, which is true. We have developed triggers which sometimes are connected to ECMWF forecast, are developed outside the official government practices. We have developed AA package, and we are delivering AA package sometime with in parallel with government mechanism, or very much complementary of preemptive evacuations, but there is still a lack of government engagement in anticipatory action in Asia and the Pacific. So we asked what were the main issues possibly for this limited engagement, and there were 4 elements that came out. One of them was maybe the need to have a better policy that address this window of opportunity between a forecast and the impact of an extreme event. A lot of policies and laws developed in the region are either covering the preparedness phase or the response phase, but it's very difficult to access funding for something in between, in a state of imminent disaster, but where the disaster hasn't materialized yet. On top of the lack of proper policy, the problem of having a clear understanding of what is anticipatory action, what's different from preparedness, how it can be linked to existing mechanism, is key for government to really advance on adopting the method. Funding is remaining challenges, especially for government to justify using public financing based on something that hasn't taken place yet, can be challenging. And the worst situation is if what we are predicting is not materializing, government usually would be worried about the consequences of using money for something that has not happened eventually. And even the last element that might help is still very much needed, which is to produce proper set of evidence that anticipatory action brings added value in managing risk of disasters. On the policy element, the first block, one quick example, and I think people are very much looking forward on how that's going to be operationalized. Philippine government passed a new law on the state of imminent disaster last September 2025. It's called the Republic Act 12287, and it's basically giving to the local government units to use, and that might still change, not more than 10% of their preparedness budget for anticipatory action, based on the severe forecast of the National Met Office, which is still not fully operational. And we expect that if this money is being used, there will be some complementary funding that can be also supporting anticipatory action at the local level. So now the government of the Philippines is developing and soon will finalize implementing rules and regulations, which will be followed by government to integrate anticipatory action in their disaster management plans, annual DM plan, and possibly next year or in 2 years, there will be a possibility to activate anticipatory action with government actors in the Philippines. That means we will need to have harmonized trigger methodology, if possible, or complementary trigger methodologies. And we will need to have coordinated package of anticipatory action that can be implemented jointly in areas possibly at risk of being hit by an extreme event. We believe, and that's, I think, been one element you were sharing, that if certain elements like the trigger, the big part of the anticipatory action can be covered by government, that might also help the sustainability of the approach in the countries where we work, and perhaps reduce a little bit the financial cost of building and maintaining systems for the humanitarian community, if most of the costs can be transferred to government. I think that is something we need to learn from and try to expand in most of the countries where we work, so that the system is not parallel but fully integrated in national practices. I think that's it, Bin. We probably reached the end of our presentation, and that's when we would like to hear from the participants. We would like to take a bit of time, and I think, Tim, we are still flexible. We can use 15 to 20, 30 minutes max for some feedback from people who would like to answer one of the 2 questions. Bin, do you want to keep the questions on the screen? I mean, I
sure,
can.
I could get back the questions, but otherwise we can also copy and paste the question in the chat. I just would like to see people. I think let me just copy and paste the question in the chat, because I would love to see people when people speak. Because if I see the screen, I share the screen, I cannot see anyone.
Indeed. So there was one question, I believe, on the interest or usefulness of defining what is a non-active anticipatory action framework, and to monitor systematically these non-active frameworks in regional or global mappings. So not only focusing on active, but trying to better get the nuance of activeness, or I think actionability of the frameworks. And I see a response that yes, we should do that. Thanks a lot. I think Nathan, thanks for confirming that it could be helpful, and I would expect that by doing a better mapping of the readiness of frameworks, we might better understand what are the challenges faced by organization to maintain these efforts that we have pushed in many countries, and we are still pushing in many countries. That was question 1. And question 2, unless maybe, we keep a bit of...
Damien, maybe I could try to answer also some of the question in the chat, which is one of the questions about, if we indicate the budget for the maintenance, how much should it be? What could be the percentage? I think that is a very practical question at the end of the day. You know, okay, we're calling for maintenance, but how would it cost? I think it would vary significantly from context to context, from hazard to hazard, it very significantly also from skills. But definitely that's something we plan to look at. So we plan to look at what is the minimum standards to keep an AA frameworks, let's say, functioning, and then how much it could cost. We are piloting the readiness funding, and for the time being, we allocate $140,000 per year for maintenance. This is during our pilots. So also just to see that if you compare between investing in building an entire system and investing in maintaining the existing systems in terms of cost benefits, it would be interesting to look at. And I see one of the comments is that we are actually in the phase of aid cuts and calling for humanitarian reset. We will need to be more efficiency. That's definitely the point. I think then there is the Damien putting on the second questions. Over to you, Damien.
Yes, actually, Margie is asking if we can indicate what to do with the non-active AA frameworks, and I believe we haven't really thought about it. I mean, I could suggest a few options, but that's something I don't know, Bin, if you have studied to define what are the main solutions to address like those barriers that are faced by certain organizations to keep without a project or to keep without a defined budget AA active. I mean, even at FAO level, we do question ourselves how to keep our AA frameworks. We have 24 AA frameworks in Asia and the Pacific, and to keep all of them active is challenging in the current context. So I don't know if there are some ideas, someone in the participants who would like to share. I saw WHH mentioning something very similar to what CARE is doing. I don't know if the colleague from WHH would like to talk about there was some funding for maintenance of AA protocols or AA plans. I think we can have some people to react. You cannot speak.
I think let me just check if we can enable people to speak. Yeah, I noticed that. Sorry, team, any chance that we can activate the mic?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can. Let me just, I think I have to make people a speaker. Is it Suda that wanted to speak?
Yes, it's Suda who mentioned some initiative from WHH.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can do it. So I can start with, I can authorize the micro. Yes. And I think you can now, Iqbal.
Yeah, please, someone please try. You should be able to speak now. Suda or Iqbal or Abdika. Yeah.
Yes.
Could you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing the study. I think it's really great to see it also support our efforts at Welthungerhilfe, because we are also now advocating for maintenance of those anticipatory action plans that has been developed and remain inactive over time. But also we are trying to still develop the concept and understand how much budget actually should be allocated for those phases, because in NGO context, as you know, we also provide in WAHAFA funding stream build and fuel phases for developing anticipatory action frameworks and fueling those frameworks in case of activation. And now we are trying to understand what is needed for maintenance of those anticipatory action frameworks and advocating towards flexible funding for those periods. For now, we were having some studies, because this was also a result of our final evaluation at WAHAFA, that the local partners were sharing that they need some sort of support in between periods, because there are a lot of staff turnovers in local NGOs, and sometimes the trigger mechanism is changing, or there's a newly developed national framework that they have to adjust their trigger mechanism for those. So they need some sort of a small funding mechanism to, join those efforts. So we have, in the very beginning, we have envisioned sort of 10% of what they have developed for the build, how much they allocated for the build. But this is still a very initial pilot idea, and we are also now trying to understand how much or what certain allocation that would be needed for this maintenance activities. And I heard, Bin, you were mentioning some amounts. Yeah, we are still also in discussion in our programming what would be the ideal. And it's really good to hear from your study that this is definitely needed. This also supports our approach, and hopefully we can stay in contact to share some resources in upcoming months. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I mean, just to share the questions about funding, I mean, we may need to think about how different donors' priorities and the idea and pool fund can be a better idea for maintenance, because maintenance have to go along the line, along the time. And we at KIA are trying to ring fences from different private and institutional donors to get some flexibility, sometimes using the private donor to advance and then using institute donor to replenish for the maintenance. So this is also a practice that we're trying, and hopefully really want to come back to you to discuss about what should be the minimum, how much should it cost. I think
thank
Iqbal,
you, Abdulkadir.
Yes, I think
Abdulkadir.
Abdulkadir.
Thank you.
I think
Thank
go
you.
ahead. Yes.
Thank you, team. Thank you, team, for the presentation and for the lively discussion. Very informative. So I'm sharing my views from Somalia. Yes, in Somalia, so far, we have had a main plan on drought anticipatory action plan that we developed. The bill phase was funded by another donor, but using the same now, we're able to go into its full phase using the early action fund. So now trying to link the plan, an existing plan, and subsequent full phases and the funding availability. So one key assumption, not only for Somalia, also for many countries, as the concept is being picked up, the practice of anticipatory action is being picked up, we foresee increase in number of AAPs, or early action frameworks, or early action protocols. So even within the same country, within the same region, you may be having several plans, maybe even for the same hazard. Maybe several plans for flood, several plans for drought. So in our case, Somalia, the main hazard are mainly drought, but we also expect flood to occur frequently. Epidemic may be coming once, but now what I was trying to come into, for the purpose of sustainability of our early action plan or early action protocols, we need to have the maintenance component in place. And considering that we may have more and more plans coming up, we might also have to think more creatively. How can we have maintenance support per hazard, not necessarily per number of plans? For example, if in Somalia we are having plans for drought and other plans for flood, it may be easier to use common basket to maintain all the different drought-related plans scattered all over the country, in different parts of the country. Similarly, we might also have, it may be much more practical to use the same fund to maintain flood-related plans scattered in several parts of the country. So what I was trying to bring about is that even for the purpose of maintenance, it may become challenging to give fund to each plan. So if there's a country has 500 flood-related plans giving funding for the maintenance of each, that's how we look at it. It may become unsustainable and unpredictable. But if you look at maybe at per hazard in the country, so maybe we're gonna provide this. At least we can assure you each country is gonna have this amount for maintenance of drought-related plans, for maintenance of flood-related plans. Otherwise, if that's not done, then they'll just become inactive. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Abdikadir. I think that's a very good point related to per hazard, because we may use more or less the same triggers, but it's just implemented differently in different regions. So the cost, at least we may save costs for the maintenance of the triggers. I think Iqbal Hussein, go ahead, and then we have Margaret next. And Damien, feel free to come in. Iqbal, can you hear us? I think you need to unmute yourself. We cannot hear you. You're still on mute.
Perhaps we can ask Margie to jump in for now.
Yes.
Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you, Margie.
Yeah, so I'm wondering because my understanding from your annual monitoring report, there are as for instance, like Asia Pacific, we did have several anticipatory action activated, right? So is there a way that we can list all these activated anticipatory actions and get the number of the cost of for each anticipatory actions? In that case, we know actually how much, but I don't know, by using Monte Carlo simulation or whatever, we can estimate how much do we really need for the anticipatory action to be activated. That's one thing. And then I guess I just want to follow up. I think there is a need to have a joint monitoring tools for the triggers where everybody can access, and probably this is much cheaper in the cost, in the sense of cost. It's like everybody can access just one platform for the trigger, so it will become low cost maintenance, because I think that's also the issue. What are the tools that we can use to automatically give us the alert when the triggers are met? And the third thing is actually good to have a lot of anticipatory action. My understanding, like what happened in Asia Pacific, at least in the East Asia, NGO works in certain area. Also, the UN works in a certain area, and then we only cover, especially for NGOs, we only cover certain areas that are in the MOU with the NGOs, like with the government. So like in Vietnam, that's what we have to do. And then for that one, we can if we can have the map, which area already have the anticipatory actions, and which area that the inactive anticipatory action happens, and also list what are the challenges. For instance, like for vision, we don't really have an issue for activating AA, because we do have our national and global reserve fund for preparedness and emergency that we can use for AA. But the issue is also because the area that we already have the AA, for instance, is already not part of the new MOU with the government, and then we cannot activate the AA in that area, right? So in that case, it's good if this thing happen, if some like project is ending or the MOU is ending, then we can try to work within the the national hub, how actually this AA can be transferred or hand over to other who has an existing project in that area. Yeah, just a suggestion here, but it's good to have a lot of AA actually in many area, because I think for NGOs like us, we cannot cover the whole nation, but we can contribute to certain area. And that's why I feel like the multi-stage layer triggers is also good. Yeah, so the lower level of the triggers can help activate it more frequent, especially area like where there is always annual flood, there is always like hit by the cyclone annually. They can activate more, although it's not like the national level triggers, but they can exercise to activate the AA frequently, and that keeps the AA alive. Hope it makes sense. Thanks.
Maybe Bin, I can answer for the first question on the cost of the activation, the budget for the activations. This information will be, of course, centralized, and we have received the information for every single activation in 2025 on how much budget was invested in the activation, so we can have the full estimation. Now I trust that we will improve, I think, our capacities if we can work on defining better package of anticipatory action. I don't think I do hope we can improve our intervention with maybe more scalable and affordable AA options if we want government to be able to replicate the work and scale the intervention with humanitarian actors. So there will be a need to really define what is acceptable, not only for humanitarian, but also for government. And I think that connects to your second point on the need to perhaps transfer the responsibility of the triggers at a certain level. I think you mentioned, Margie, a regional level taking care of the trigger, but I do expect national government to take that responsibility in the future. As I mentioned, this is something we are trying to set up in the Philippines, and we will really need to work on having government providing the trigger information, the trigger statement for AA, which could be either implemented by humanitarian actors or by local government or key ministries like the Ministry of Agriculture. So I trust we can transfer certain responsibilities to reduce certain costs of AA within our organizations, and the transfer should be towards national governments ideally. I don't think, Margie, we could take the triggers at the regional level, but perhaps I misunderstood your point on the regional role.
Yeah, not the regional, but national hub. So because they should have the map, right? Who works where, who has the IA protocol in what area?
The national technical working groups, you mean?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, there was in the Philippines some discussion on harmonizing trigger among the humanitarian actors first, which is certainly a good step. But then, yeah, now we are talking about harmonizing with government and using ideally a common trigger methodology for humanitarian actors and government. So eventually it should be government providing the trigger information. I don't know, Bin, if you want to add anything on how to reduce cost of maintenance by transferring certain responsibilities to national technical working group or national government.
Yeah, I think having more frameworks is not necessarily the same thing with having the operational capacities. I see your point, Margaret, about that. Oh, we don't have MOU, so we develop frameworks in places that we having the MOU. I am afraid that we can still having global frameworks, and then we can having operational in the areas that we are present. So it's not necessarily resulting in many frameworks at the same times, because I still believing that we have so many parallel frameworks, and that will put a lot of burden on the maintenance. I also see that actually it's easy to say, difficult to do in terms of coordination. Like, you know, what Alex mentioned is that in some, especially small countries in Pacific, you know, you cannot just pass these responsibilities to the national agencies because they are overstretched. So coming back to the core questions of AA, whether AA should be a standalone or it should be embedded in a larger disaster risk management resilience building, whether at the same time we build the capacities of the national met services before handing them the responsibilities that we're expecting them to do. So I think it's very classic. We say again and again that anticipatory action should be part of bigger resilience framework building. So I don't think there is a perfect solution. There is no silver magic bullet, but I think we can just closing here on saying that there is an issues here, and it related to the maintenance of the systems. It is significant over time. It is increasing together with the growing of the anticipatory action. It is important to put our intention into that, whether in terms of setting of understanding what it is by mapping it, like say Damien, because we have a difficult time to map and to look into different data by Asia Pacific, by hubs. You know, we don't have a kind of a systems or data that helping us to understand it. So starting with understanding what is the current situation out there, and then by it's integrated systematically in our global mapping, in our regional mapping, and then working together, understanding what could be the minimum standards, what could be the budget implications, what can we do in specific contexts together. So this is very much, I hope, the starting point of maybe a second conversations, maybe next time that we can discuss more in detail what exactly we can do to make our AA ready and really active. So a little bit of a closing remarks from my side. Rick, Damien and Tim.
Maybe a quick point. I do agree with you that the mapping should give that understanding of what is the status of the frameworks much better than we are doing in the past. We need to capture the nuance between a completed and fully active framework and a completed but not ready for activation framework. Just wanted to say that our consultant will provide some suggestion on the terminology and the definition, but we need to have a clear agreement with the anticipation hub so that the same methodology can perhaps apply at the global level. Because we really don't want to have disparity in the information between the global and the regional. So if we can find some way of aligning and adding this perhaps additional category or status of the frameworks, we need to have some agreement with the team. I don't know, Tim, if you would like maybe a few final words.
Yeah, so this is something that I think is what we want to do. We want to have consistent reporting across organizations and across regions. I guess the challenge is not everyone quite sees it the same way. I think it was touched on in some of the comments. So it's very hard to know why this is, but for example, we get submitted what is called official data from sort of big UN agencies, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, and we also get partners of the Anticipation Hub. So a lot of those are national societies, Red Cross national societies, or Red Crescent, and also NGOs, a lot of NGOs. And I don't think, although this report is a big step towards that, I don't think there's a consistent definition of what is active and what is inactive. I think there are people who would say, well, our framework is active, but we don't have any money for it. We can still put it into place, but we don't have the money. And there are others who would say, well, if you don't have the money, it's inactive. But I guess the challenge that we have, and I hope this doesn't sound too much like getting out of jail card from my side, is the data is self-reported. So we give people definitions to work from. We say, this is what we mean by an active framework. This is what we mean by framework under development. This is what we mean by an activation. But as the Anticipation Hub, we don't have the capacity to monitor that in more detail than kind of anything that looks uncertain to us, or doesn't quite make sense. We follow up with the person that submitted the data, and we will check that and say, right, can you sort of show us what you mean by your framework here? But it's also, I mean, I think maybe from the Anticipation Hub side, I don't want to say we're kind of neutral. We have a clear idea of what an active framework should be. But if other people are saying, well, our framework is active and we want to report it as active, then we want to hear that perspective as well. I mean, there was an example from a case study we did last year in Sri Lanka, the World Vision Lanka. They have a framework for floods in the highlands of Sri Lanka. And I think that the project funding that they got to set up that framework expired, but they would still consider it active because the communities that they worked with can still get the early warning mission messages, and they've still been given awareness of what they need to do if there's a warning for flood. So there's no fuel funding behind it, to the best of my knowledge, but the actions that they need, which is evacuation to the safe centre, acting on the early warning, sharing them with people at risk, they consider it. I mean, maybe you could say it's not a framework, it's a process. You've set in place an anticipatory action process rather than a framework. But yeah, it needs exploring further. But Damien is completely right. It's going to be even more confusing to people if there's different definitions and different types of mapping out there. We need to get them consistent. And from our side, that means not just with Asia Pacific, but also with the regions in Africa, with Central America, and the other regions of the world that are starting to map these frameworks as well. And yeah, it's like an awful lot of things. It's what we want to do. Getting there is sometimes takes a little bit of time, but we're kind of in discussions with that, and we are looking to make sure there's consistent data. But I think this presentation is the report is a big step forward towards that. And I think as well, not just in working towards a definition and starting the mapping, I think raising the issue, for me, this is just as important, that there are frameworks going inactive out there. I'm not sure all governments are aware of that. I'm not sure all of our partners are aware of that. So I think having these discussions that, look, we've hit a problem. When anticipatory action was very new as an approach, there's a lot of funding towards it, a lot of organizations got involved, and we're perhaps over that initial curve now. And now we're getting to the stage where those initial projects are running out of money, or the projects have expired from a time-wise, and it's a new challenge for this approach, and a new challenge for those working on this approach to say, right, what's the next phase? What's this going to look like when we've set these things up, but we now need to maintain them? And there's quite a lot of interesting comments in the chat there. And I see this very much as the start of a conversation that I hope will continue at the dialogue platforms that are happening this year, and also hopefully in future work from the regional technical working groups. And yeah, a big thank you to CARE and to the Asia Pacific Technical Working Group for pushing this discussion forward, because I think it's very important. Bin or Damien or Celine, do you want any final words, and then we can close the call?
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Tim. And yeah, maybe see you all again in the global dialogue platform where we can talk more about it. I think it should be the starting of many more discussion to go. Definitely. Yeah, let's hope so. And the global dialogue platform will be happening. We're just trying to pin down a date, and then we will announce that. So the silence on our side is because we're just sorting out venues. But so thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, once again, for your comments. It's very active in the chat. And I think the link to the report has been put in the chat, and we'll share that again. The Anticipation will help share that with the recording of this meeting if you've got colleagues that would like to know more about this, and we'll share the link to the report as well. But for now, thank you all very much. Thank you very much to our speakers, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
And bye to all of you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.